Good morning, everybody. With you again on a Saturday morning, and as I promised last week, I'm going to do something new today. Probably something I really haven't shared much, if at all, on. I know you've been listening to the teachings on unity and disunity. Now I want to move toward a subject that I believe really needs to become important to us, and that is the nation of Israel. I want to talk to you about why Israel is unique to God, to nations of the world, and especially to the church. So that's where I'm going to go today. We're going to look at a few Old Testament scriptures, but I'm going to land in Romans later on. So follow with me. We're going to pick up in Jeremiah 12 and verse 7. First of all, before I get to that, let me just say this. Israel began, as you probably are aware, with one man named Abram, who becomes Abraham. He's not a Jew. He is from Ur of the Chaldees, which is probably Babylon, and he comes into a relationship with God. And out of his marriage to Sarah, he has Isaac. And out of Isaac's marriage to Rebekah, he has Jacob. And Jacob is well known as the one who, through Leah and Rachel and two concubines, has 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob gets his name changed to Israel after he wrestles with the angel of the Lord, and God changes his name to Israel, a prince with God and also one who prevailed with God. So when you think of Israel as a nation, think one man, Abraham, 12 tribes, the sons of Jacob, and eventually a nation that God is in covenant with, that cannot be broken. Even as Israel backslid in the Old Testament, apostatized, look at Jeremiah 12:7 says this, the Lord speaking, I have forsaken my house, I have abandoned my inheritance, I have given the beloved of my soul, notice that, into the hand of her enemies. You might say, wow, that's pretty heavy, but the Lord chastens or disciplines those whom he loves, even today among his children in the New Testament, but especially with Israel. And this wasn't the only occasion of backsliding. There were numerous ones. But I want you to see here, I have given the beloved of my soul. Another place, I believe it's in Zechariah chapter 2, verse 8, God calls Israel the apple of his eye. So he's the one who has birthed Israel. He's their protector. He's their provider. He's their lover. Why? Because he's in covenant relationship with them. So that's why they are unique to God. Now, what about the nations of the world, especially in the so-called inflammable Middle East? Every nation of the world in that area, I should say, in the Middle East, practically speaking, is against Israel. They see them as the obstacle of world peace, a scapegoat. And you can trace this back many, many centuries, but I think the prime example would be in the 1930s and 40s under Hitler's Germany. So they are a target. Israel has a target on its back that the politicians of the world, they vent their biases toward Israel. Their ignorance is very much seen, and they do this, constantly. We see in various places in the Old Testament, I believe it's in Ezekiel, the nations of the south, 10 kings will rise up against Israel. And this is looked at prophetically to the future. More or less, likely the nations around Israel. And even to the north, you see names, ancient names like Gog and Magog that oppose Israel at some time. But you know what? Israel has God on their side. And they're not going to be defeated. That's the good news. They are a blessed people. And whether you see it or not, hopefully you will after a little bit more of this teaching, God is on their side, or I should say they are on God's side. It's the only democracy in the entire inflammable Middle East where usually a one-party system rules, dominated by military men who really don't know anything about economics and government. They're all about war. And so Israel's right in the middle, in the cradle. I heard it said one time, the Middle East is the cradle of the universe. And I believe, Babylon, which is modern day Iraq, is the center of the universe. And Israel, in proximity to that, you've got Iran and various places, Syria, all of that in this area here, the Middle East. Interestingly, in 1948, we know Israel got their independence from Great Britain, which had control over them. And today, Israel is looked upon as a superpower. Their status has been relegated to a superpower like America and a few other countries, but at one point it wasn't that at all. They were subservient, they were dominated by other nations, especially Great Britain. And interestingly, Great Britain was once a superpower in itself. It hasn't been for years. And I believe it's because they opposed Israel's independence in the beginning. Later on, they went along with it. But, it's true what God said in Genesis chapter 12. He's speaking to Abraham. He says, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. So whether you agree with that or not, and I know there's probably some speculation in that in terms of the overall falling of superpower status, but Israel has risen up. Now, or at least lately, I haven't heard of any bombings, wars, threats of wars, anything that to do with Israel. Why? Because the nations of the world know that they have been built up in their military, their weaponry, their armaments, all these things, and they have a healthy respect, not a like or even definitely not a love for Israel, but a respect. And they know they are a force to be reckoned with. You got a lot of different people in Israel, religious people, secular people. You've got rabbinic, Orthodox, Messianic, which I believe is on the rise. I heard lately of a revival type atmosphere broke out in the upper room in Jerusalem. They were asked to leave after a while, but something has begun to take shape and form there that the Lord is wooing his covenant people into a relationship with Yeshua. And that excites us. So with all of that, you have Israel looked upon by the world, very unique, important, and something that is totally different from where they came from. And then what about to the church, to you and to me? Excuse me. Christians have their roots in Judaism. I'm sure you're familiar with the term Judeo-Christian. We see this in different writings and teachings. What does that mean? It means that Christianity has come out of Judaism, separate, but it has its roots in Judaism. I want to read some scripture in Romans chapter 11, beginning in verse 17, if you want to follow with me there. Paul writing to the mostly Gentile church in Rome, he says, but if some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive, were grafted in among them, and became partaker with them of the rich root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches. But if you are arrogant, remember that it is not you who supports the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. Quite right. They were broken off for their unbelief, but you stand by your faith. Do not be conceited, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. Behold then the kindness and severity of God to those who fell, severity, but to you God's kindness. If you continue in his kindness, otherwise you also may be cut off. And they also, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. For if you were cut off from what is by nature a wild olive tree, and were grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, who are the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? Now, I know there's a lot of, symbolism in here, but basically, Paul is saying the church of Jesus Christ is grafted in to Israel, to the Jew. And that's not going to change. What is going to change at some point is God is going to put more of a precedent, more of a importance on reaching Jewish people than Gentiles. It's called the time of the Gentiles being fulfilled, and that's going to come at some point in the future, probably sooner than later. And the attention is going to be put upon Israel in bringing them to faith in their Messiah, Yeshua. Will all be saved? No. But I believe there's going to be a movement, or even more than one, that is going to bring in the Jew. And so Paul's warning the Gentile Christians not to be arrogant, saying, "Oh, I'm the favor of God now. The Jews, he's disdained and done away with." No. God is still in a relationship with Israel, even though many don't know him. He is a covenant-keeping God. And there's error today saying the church has replaced Israel. They call it replacement theology. I'm here to tell you, if you haven't heard that before, it is a lie from the pit of hell. God is still in relationship with Israel. He's in covenant with them. So that's not going to be broken. So we need to have a healthy respect toward Israel, a love for them, seeing their origin and where God has taken them, and esteem them. And I want to pretty much end with this. All Christians, in my opinion, should visit Israel at least one time. I had the privilege of going there 12 years ago, 2011. I took a team, I think it was about 14 people over there. And it was a tremendous time. I'd like to go back at some point, but that changed my life in many ways, especially reading and studying the Bible, because you are walking in the land which Jesus walked and ministered in, the early church, going back into the Old Testament, the patriarchs, the kings like David, the prophets, all these people. Israel was the centerpiece of the scriptures. And, we spent 3 days in Jerusalem, a lot to see there, a lot to cover. We spent time in Galilee and the Golan Heights, which sometimes they don't go up there. Our particular guide wanted us to see that. Jericho, Bethlehem, of course, Tel Aviv, we landed there. Masada, the Dead Sea. I mean, we got a lot in, I don't know how many days it was, 7 or 8 days, plus a couple of travel days, 10 days in all. And you can get a tour. There's a lot of agencies that do this. Maranatha is one of them. 3,000, 3,500, something like that. It's worth every penny. Not only will your biblical knowledge expand, you can see in your mind's eye when you read different places, wow, yeah, I was there. I remember what that was like. Or your videos or photos, whatever. It will definitely increase your relationship with the Lord. And it's always changing, too. I took 2 sisters with me who were there in the 90s, and they said in 2011, they said this was different. We've seen things we haven't seen before. Why? Because Israel knows tourism is a means of revenue, and they have archaeological digs, not just for the money, the history as well. They have archaeological digs, excavations, where they pull up various things. When we were there, they had recently pulled up the flooring, ceramic flooring of Herod's temple in Caesarea Philippi. They got it up from the Mediterranean Sea, and we saw it. Beautiful. And other excavations, part of the Via Dolorosa, the road in which Jesus is walking down with his cross, they had pulled that up and they said, this is the original stones in which Christ walked on. Others as well. So I would encourage you to go there at some point in time. Last thing I want to say is this. Psalm 122, verse 6 says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We need to do that. We need to pray for wisdom for their leaders. We need to pray that they would come to know the Messiah, Yeshua. We need to pray for their protection and so many things. So ask God, if you don't have one, ask him for a heart for Israel. It will greatly enhance your relationship with the Lord, and your own Christian life will take on some new dimensions also. Last scripture I want to say here is Amos chapter 3 and verse 2. It says, you only, Israel, have I known of all the families of the earth. It is so special to God. So I hope you're encouraged by this today and begin to see the importance, the significance, the uniqueness of Israel to God, to the nations of the world, and to the church. All right, so until I see you next time, have a good week. God bless.